So a lot of people have been asking me about my Otharri deck. In my most recent video about monolith commanders, I mentioned this deck as a prime example of how I like to run a monolith commander. A commander that is extremely powerful and the entire deck is built around that commander alone. I mentioned the Otharri deck quite a bit and a lot of you suggested this, so here it is. Here is the definitive deck list. This deck revolves around Otharri's Sun Glory. Otharri is a 5-mana flying lifelink and haste creature that says whenever Otharri's Sun's Glory attacks, you get an experience counter. Then create a 2/2 red rebel creature token that's tapped and attacking for each experience counter you have. You can then pay 2, a red and a white, to tap an untapped rebel you control, and you can return Otharri from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Otharri has an extremely powerful effect with experience counters that are extremely hard to interact with. The only thing experience counters can do is go up. We run extra combats to get more attack triggers to get more experience counters. We have quite a few proliferation abilities. And of course, as I mentioned in a previous video, we run a ton of protection in order to keep Otharri on the board. We have a lot of token payoffs, some interaction, and a bit of card draw that can keep us in the game. This deck is extremely reliant on Otharri, and there are no other win conditions besides Otharri, which is why the deck is so focused and has so much protection in it. If you do not have Otharri on the board, you are not winning a game. There is no other creature in the deck that can really stand to be a main attacker. Otharri is your engine. Now let's get into the deck list. First up, we got the ramp package. You want to be able to get into Otharri as fast as possible so that you can immediately start swinging and getting those experience counters. For ramp, we run Arcane Signet, Boros Signet, Felwar Stone, Soul Ring, Talisman of Conviction, Mind Stone, Knight of the White Orchid, and Weathered Wayfarer. All of these sources are extremely good. If anything, the best is probably Soul Ring and Weathered Wayfarer. Weathered Wayfarer has kept me in so many games because it almost guarantees that I'm going to get a land drop for the price of 1 mana. In a Boros color, if you can have any sort of ramp in terms of lands, you need it. Next, we'll go into the draw spells. In red and white, there's not a ton of options for card draw, but we have some things. For card draw, I run Big Score, Cut a Deal, Faithless Looting, Heartwarming Redemption, Seize the Spoils, Thrill of Possibility, Thrilling Discovery, Unexpected Windfall, and Valakut Awakening. I have thought about maybe putting in some wheels for this deck to keep it going faster, but the biggest problem with wheels besides budget is the fact that it helps your opponents draw into more answers for Otharri. You really want one-sided draw, and you don't want to have other people drawing cards. Other than that, this is the card draw that we have right now, and it really helps me stay in the game. Lastly, before we get into the main strategy, let's go over the removal/interaction suite. There's a bit of creature removal, but a lot of it is focused on permanents and or artifacts and enchantments. Artifacts and enchantments are going to be the biggest halt for us as they can probably control how we attack, so we want to be getting rid of artifacts and enchantments whenever we can. For removal, we have Chaos Warp, Destroy Evil, Generous Gift, Kabira Takedown, Lightning Bolt, Path to Exile, Rip Apart, Swords to Plowshares, Vandal Blast, and Volt Charge. Volt Charge is really, in many ways, a bad use of 3 mana, but with the Proliferate ability, it really works, because Proliferation basically means that you're not only just getting 3 damage, but you're also getting an extra creature, and you're speeding up your gameplay. Now that we've gone over all the stuff that just kind of makes a commander deck run smoothly, let's get into the engine. In order for an engine to run, you need a car to be built around it that can withstand everything else. So let's go over the protection. For protection, there's a lot of phasing out, full blinking, spot protection just for Otharri, and making your creatures indestructible. For protection, we run Boros Charm, Clever Concealment, Deflecting Swat, Eerie Interlude, Ephemerate, Flawless Maneuver, Ghostway, Make a Stand, Mother of Runes, Red Elemental Blast, Sajiri Shelter, Selfless Spirit, Surge of Salvation, Swiftfoot Boots, Teferi's Protection, and Unbreakable Formation. In most cases, you're going to want to only protect Otharri. You don't care too much if your tokens get removed. You'll have quite a bit of them anyways, but they're really just a distraction. They make your board super wide, they make it look really scary, but most of the actual token payoffs are going to be around the tokens just being on the battlefield, entering the battlefield, or being sacrifice fodder. So in many cases, you want to save this protection only for when Otharri is getting targeted. Sometimes you're actually okay with Otharri being destroyed because of its ability. You always want to make sure that a rebel is not attacking just in case Otharri does get destroyed. Something that you need to make sure of is that Otharri does not get exiled. Otharri getting exiled means that you have no choice but to put Otharri in the command zone. So always make sure to have protection for when it gets exiled. Sometimes you won't have it as that's a bit niche. You either need to blink Otharri or you need to give it hexproof or protection from certain colors. but in most cases you'll have a good answer for any removal spell. Now let's go into the token payoffs. Otharri is going to be making a ton of tokens every single turn. And if you get extra combats or you're able to double the amount of triggers Otharri gets off, these token payoffs are going to be crazy. First up is like the Impact Tremors kind of effects. We have Impact Tremors, Perforos, God of the Forge, War Leader's Call, and Witty Roastmaster. Then just some more generically good stuff. We have Goblin Bombardment, Throne of the God Pharaoh, Nayeli, Sun's Vanguard, Shared Animosity, and Gold Knight Commander. And lastly, we have Battle Hymn. Battle Hymn is great as it will pay for basically all of your extra combat spells if and when needed. Let's say you have 2 extra combats in your hand, but you just don't have the mana for it. Usually you can attack, play Battle Hymn, and then you can play 2 extra combat spells because you're making so many tokens. Goblin Bombardment is great as if your board does get cleared and you're only able to protect Otharri, but not the rest of your board, you can instantly just sack your board to ping somebody in the face. And Throne of the God Pharaoh is actually sleeper good as all of your tokens come in tapped and attacking. So at the end of your turn, your opponents will basically be taking the amount of creatures that attack that turn. I've gotten sometimes where I deal 15 damage at my end step. Now let's get into the main strategy, which is extra combats. We have Relentless Assault, Response and Resurgence, Savage Beating, Seize the Day, World at War, Aggravated Assault, Aurelia the War Leader, and Combat Celebrant. All of these are pretty much the best bang for your buck extra combat spells that you will need. World at War has Rebound, so you're guaranteed 2 extra combats over the span of 2 turns. Savage Beating allows you to almost have a win condition if you entwine it. Aurelia the War Leader is another great creature that lets you get extra combats every single turn. Aggravated Assault is the same way. It's basically just a mana sink where you can guarantee you're getting an extra combat every turn. Combat Celebrant is a great last resort card. It's not amazing, but it gets you an extra combat, which is always nice. And Seize the Day, of course, has Flashback, which is very similar to Rebound from World at War, and you want to be able to cast this multiple times. And lastly, we have Value. All of these cards are here because they just provide insane value for your commander. First up, we have Strionic Resonator. Strionic Resonator allows you to double all of the triggers that you need. Strionic Resonator is basically an extra combat spell with just a lot less mana sunk into it. You get to trigger it twice, therefore, instead of making 3 tokens, you'll make 3 and then 4. Instead of making 5 tokens, you'll make 5 and then 6. Instead of making 7 tokens, you'll make 7 and then 8. You grow your experience counters a ton. It's just an insane card. We have Staff of Completion. You're going to be gaining so much life through Otharri that it really doesn't matter which of these modes you choose. If you're low on cards, you can draw a card. If you want to pay 3 life, you get to proliferate. And if you pay 2 life, you can add some mana. Gisela, Blade of Gold Knight, is basically a win con. There's almost nothing your opponents are going to be able to do once you get Gisela out. You're going to be dealing double damage on top of extra combats, Strionic Resonator triggers, anything like that. Gisela is just going to win you the game. And lastly, we have Jessica's Will and Dockside Extortionist. I treat these 2 cards more like rituals. Dockside Extortionist can definitely be a little bit of a salty card, especially in a more casual format, but in high power, most people are pretty okay with it. Dockside Extortionist is just in there because I have it in paper, and it's a really good ritual to get me Otharri out on turn 3 or 4 without actually spending a lot of mana. Jessica's Will is the same way. Most people are going to have 7 cards. You get 7 mana. You get to immediately cast Otharri. It's just a great card. For the land base, most of it is pretty much just every untapped land with no fetches, and then there's a few utility lands. I run Buried Ruined just in case one of my artifacts get destroyed. Let's say Staff of Completion, Strionic Resonator, or Throne of the God Pharaoh. Buried Ruined lets me get that back. Karn's Bastion so I can proliferate, and Slayer's Stronghold. It just gives Otharri Vigilance, which is nice on a lot of times because then you have a blocker in the air. Or you can give a Rebel Vigilance so that you can tap it to then resurrect Otharri in case you're scared of that. And that's the deck list. Again, there are really no other win conditions besides the fact that Otharri needs to be on the board. Every single card in here is in there to serve Otharri and to serve the overall game plan of attacking, attacking, and attacking. This is an aggro deck. It is extremely fast, and I have probably a 90% win rate with it. I don't track the games fully, but out of the times I've played Otharri, I've only lost 3 times. This deck is by far my favorite deck that I own. I own all of it in paper, and it has been worth every single penny. Let's get into how to play the deck. First, we'll go over the mulligans. In the mulligan, your dream hand would be 2 lands, a piece of ramp or a ritual, and a form of protection. you're really only looking for 4 to maybe 5 cards, and you can be flexible with the rest. You want to almost always have 2 different colors. You never want to be mana screwed on only mountains or only plains. You want to have at least 1 dual land, but you're really only looking for 4 cards. Everything else is just a cherry on top. Now, the biggest skill gap between Otharri players that are really successful versus not so successful is when you use your protection. Every single turn is pretty easy. You're going to attack with Otharri, you're going to hopefully get an extra combat step off, and then you're going to pass the turn. The deck runs itself. You are always going to have mana held up. The more mana you have held up, the less likely people will try to remove Otharri. Simply having 3 mana up for any of your protection spells is always going to be a good sign for you. Sometimes you don't even need a protection spell, and you can hold up that 3 mana. That 3 mana is going to be enough sway that you can probably actually talk your way out of a removal spell coming towards Otharri and onto a different threat that's on the board. Another hard part about Otharri is realizing when to actually cast Otharri. While it's really nice to cast Otharri on turn 4 or 5 because you've ramped up to him, if the other players don't really have a board state and they have full hands, you almost don't want to cast Otharri because they almost certainly have removal for him. And when they have removal or interaction for Otharri and you only have 5 mana available, you don't want to be sitting around for 2 turns waiting for more mana. So because of that, always make sure to check what your opponents have in hand. Are they tapped out in mana? What could they possibly do? And check your ranges on what they might have. But as soon as Otharri gets out, you're good to go. In most cases, if people don't have it and you're able to untap with Otharri, you will most likely win the game, as you should have a protection spell in your hand. At that point, it's just about attacking and keeping up that mana to hold up for protection. In the first couple turns of the game, you're going to want to establish a board presence. You want to be able to cast your enchantments or creatures that give you payoffs for tokens. You want to hopefully have 1 or 2 extra combat spells that you draw into, and you want to make sure that you can have things on your board rather than just having Otharri on the board. This is something to look for in the mulligan. And that's pretty much it. Otharri is not a super complicated deck, but it's about knowing what the other players are up to and what their ranges are. Do they have a removal spell? Are they prepared for Otharri? Can I cast Otharri right now? Should I keep up this mana to protect Otharri? Or should I play an extra combat spell? It's all about thinking what your opponents are going to do. And then on top of that, it's about swinging with Otharri. In terms of who to attack, you want to attack the player that cannot defend Otharri. The player that has no flyers, the player that has the least amount of board state, and the player that's honestly behind the most. This might seem a bit rude, but you want to target the player that doesn't have a board state because this deck will outrace other decks. If you can kill one player, you will almost certainly win the game. The few times I've lost with this deck is when I've attacked the player that's been the most ahead. Typically, when a player is doing really well, they will have answers for you, and you don't want that to happen. You want to attack the person that's doing the worst, that has no board state that you can go after. Again, it's really rude, but the goal of the deck is to win the game as fast as possible. And usually, if you're doing that and you're beating up on somebody that's not doing as well, the player that's doing second best or the best will not really worry about you. They will go and they'll think, oh, I can just get ahead while I'm doing my thing. After you're able to defeat the one player that you were targeting, Otharri is wide enough and strong enough where you can't really be stopped. At that point, you should have a board state, you should have plenty of protection, and you should have at least 1 or 2 extra combat spells that will just win you the game. The game jumps wide open as soon as you get rid of one player. And that's about it. Again, Otharri is all about targeting, finding your ranges on your opponent, and choosing what mana to hold up for the defensive or the offensive. I hope you guys enjoyed this deck tech. Please leave a like on the video, comment what you want to see next, and make sure to subscribe. And also share this with your friends so Otharri can be the most popular Boros commander out there. Again, I just want to thank everyone so much for all the support that you have given thus far. Below in the description, I will leave the Moxfield link to the deck. Feel free to proxy it. Feel free to try it out. I hope you guys enjoy playing this deck as much as I do. And again, thank you so much for all the growth in such a short period of time. I never thought it would get this way. We're almost at 1,000 subs within the first 3 weeks of me having this channel. So I just want to thank everyone so much for watching. Again, I can't thank you enough.